Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Rose Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The Kentucky Wildcats, they just landed another 2023 recruit. And no, it's not a 5-star, but it's still a player. And at this stage of the game, any addition is huge. Jordan Burks, a former Ole Miss commit, has signed with the Kentucky Wildcats. He's a borderline 3 or 4-star recruit, depending on the service. He's a 6'9" player. I'm going to go over how important this addition is for the Kentucky Wildcats and whether I think that Jordan Burks can help a Kentucky team that will be extremely young and going against the grain in college basketball next season. Now, Jordan Burks, again, is a guy that was committed to Ole Miss. He was a guy that Chris Beard would have definitely been able to use this season at a fairly high level. He's also a guy that a lot of people are conflicted on whether he is a 3 or 4-star recruit. Depending on the service, you will see him a lot higher or a lot lower depending on people's thoughts and opinions of him, but he is a guy that has talent. It probably will take a little while for him to adjust to the college game, which most freshmen have to do. Even 5-star freshmen have to adjust to the college game, but sometimes the 3 and 4-star recruits, it takes even longer. But I do think that Jordan Burks has a chance to be able to play for the Kentucky Wildcats next year right out of the gate because of the fact that Jordan Burks is only the 9th player that Kentucky will for sure have on their college basketball team for next season, and that is a problem. Kentucky, they're not in shambles like some people would say that they are in this offseason. It's not like John Calipari has done an awful job or anything like that, but the biggest issue that Kentucky has right now is that they're going back to their ways of when Kentucky first had John Calipari as a head coach, getting freshmen and only using freshmen for the most part as the majority of their roster. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially when those freshmen are extremely talented. In Kentucky, they've got the #1 recruiting class by a long shot. They've got a great looking class. They've got some fantastic freshmen coming in, and we're going to dive into all those players. But the thing about college basketball today, especially with all these players that are coming back with extra years of eligibility, and NIL is keeping more players in college than ever before, you have to have experience. You cannot win with just a freshman class, and that's about it. Kentucky right now is not in the best shape in the world. They're not going to be the best team in the SEC next season unless these freshmen are elite, unless these guys come in and are studs right out of the gate, and all of them end up being one and dones, most of the freshmen anyway. If not, there's no way Kentucky's going to be toward the top of the SEC, at least in the top 2 or 3, because of the fact that Arkansas, Alabama, some of these other teams have a lot more experience, and it's going to be really difficult for Kentucky to compete with that. And I know that John Calipari, you could say that he is definitely on the hot seat. I know that's really hard to say for sure because he has that lifetime contract and all that, and he's supposed to be employed for a long time. He's getting paid a lot, so it would be hard for Kentucky to fire him, and he has done a lot for the program, getting so many players that were 5-stars and getting them to the pros. It has completely changed Kentucky's image from a team that, like most other teams, did have guys that stayed in college for a few years to a team that was one-and-done oriented. But even John Calipari realized it wasn't working anymore, and that's why he was bringing in transfers like Oscar Tshiebwe and other guys like that to be able to have more experience on their team, and Antonio Reeves, who is undecided on their team right now. But Kentucky in this offseason has got 0 transfers. They haven't got one, and you think about all the guys that have entered, and Kentucky has reached out to all these players. There are tons of guys, even just as recently as Arthur Kaluma, who just went to Kansas State, big addition for them, but the wrong Wildcats for Kentucky. They were not able to land them. That was a tough loss. They're not getting any of these guys, and I almost feel like the freshman class is turning these players away because they don't want to go to a Kentucky when they know that there's a good chance they might not even start because Cal's going to play these 5-star freshmen and try to get them to the pros. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Cal playing those guys, but it is turning away experienced guys that want to go to a school where they know they're going to be starting, that they know they're going to be the focal point of the offense, and they're not going to be at Kentucky when your role is not going to be completely defined, especially with these freshmen that are more than likely going to get a lot of the minutes. So Kentucky is in a bind. They're in an interesting predicament, but all is not lost because Kentucky, based on raw talent alone, is going to be a top 25 team in college basketball next season. Will they be a Final Four team or a team that's in the top 10 in college basketball? Probably not, just because they don't have experience unless they can get a guy or two late in the transfer portal game. There's still guys out there. Paul Mulcahy's in the transfer portal. Joey Hart's a high school player that Kentucky's still looking at, but things are looking really interesting for Kentucky. It's not going to be a fantastic offseason for them unless they can get a guy or two in the portal. But looking at this class, Justin Edwards is a 5-star recruit. He's a 6'7" small forward. He's a great player. He's going to start for Kentucky next season. He's got a lot of talent. Again, there's always worrying of an adjustment period going into the college game, but I do think that Justin Edwards will be able to adjust to the college game fairly easily. That's probably a big reason why Arthur Kaluma didn't go to Kentucky, because they already had a 6'7" player again that was going to start. You look at 7-footer Aaron Bradshaw. He's a 5-star recruit as well, and Aaron Bradshaw is really talented and possibly a big reason why Oscar Tshiebwe decided to leave Kentucky and go to the draft. is Oscar Tshiebwe does not want to have to compete with Aaron Bradshaw for minutes at that center spot, and I don't think that they could play together, even though Aaron Bradshaw is a guy that is very versatile. Oscar Tshiebwe is more of a down-low player. I just don't know if they would have been able to coalesce on the court, so Oscar Tshiebwe is gone. That is really tough for Kentucky because they needed his experience, but at least Aaron Bradshaw, even though his youth probably will show on the college basketball court next season, he's still an extremely talented player that should help Kentucky next year. DJ Wagner, Milt Wagner's grandson, a guy that Louisville and Kentucky were fighting over for sure because Milt Wagner's on Louisville's staff. Kentucky got him as well. He's a 6'3", 5-star guard. He's really talented. All these guys are talented. That's not the issue. The talent's there, but how is this going to mesh together? Because this is not college basketball from 10 years ago, where a lot of players were leaving early, and there was a lot of guys that if they stayed in college basketball, they just weren't very good. Now players are staying in college basketball that could be potentially borderline first-round picks because of NIL and the fact that these guys are just being smart and knowing when it's their time to go. So Kentucky, again, a lot of youth, but they have so much talent. Another 5-star player, Robert Dillingham, he's a 6'2" guard. The one thing that does help Kentucky is they positionally have gotten the right guys. This roster is positionally set up pretty well. You've got Robert Dillingham at 6'2", DJ Wagner at 6'3", and then you've got a forward in Justin Edwards, and then Aaron Bradshaw at center. And if you do get Antonio Reeves back, even though he is still currently on the Kentucky roster, but there has been a lot of rumors that he could transfer. We don't know, so definitely not going to speculate whether he's going to transfer or not. But if Antonio Reeves stays, he could be at the 3. So that's not a bad starting lineup. At least you'll have one experienced guy, then the other 4 are the super talented freshmen. It's not a bad starting 5. A lot of teams would definitely love to have that starting 5, but you just would like to have more experience in that starting 5. But those 4 5-star freshmen, Robert Dillingham, DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, and Justin Edwards, are supremely talented, and Calipari is definitely going to be excited to be working with him this next season. Reed Shepherd is a 6'3" guard who's a 4-star recruit. He'll be coming off the bench, but I really like his game, and the fact that he's from Kentucky, he's a home state kid, I think that will definitely help out the Kentucky Wildcats next season to have a guy that definitely wants to play for the program. Sometimes guys like that are very invaluable. And then they just got Jordan Burks, the commitment that is why we're talking about Kentucky right now. Again, a good addition. He's probably going to come off the bench. He's probably not going to make the biggest impact for Kentucky next season, but he will be a solid player overall. And the only 2 other guys that Kentucky has is Adu Thero and Ugonna Oyensu. Those were 2 recruits that Kentucky got in last year's class. Ugonna Oyensu almost entered the portal and left Kentucky, but he did decide to return, probably because he knew he'd be a backup center at the very least because Damian Collins left. But that's just it. Kentucky lost Lance Ware. Kentucky lost Chris Livingston, Oscar Tshiebwe, CJ Frederick. All these guys are gone. That is the toughest thing. Damian Collins as well. All these guys Kentucky lost to the draft or the portal, and I just think that's a bad look overall to lose all those guys because they knew that either A, they weren't going to get playing time, or B, they were going to have to fight for minutes, or maybe the roster just wasn't going to be constructed that well around them, and all these freshmen were going to steal their minutes. It's a really tough situation to be in. Again, Kentucky's not in a completely bad place. John Calipari, not on the hot seat yet. He is definitely starting to heat up a little bit. He needs to win, and this year's team, they at least need to be a top 4 or 5 team in the SEC next season because the talent alone, they should be a top 25 team in college basketball next year, but they're going to have a lot of problems unless they can get an experienced player or 2 in the portal. There's still guys entering the portal. The well is not completely dry. Maybe a Paul Mulcahy will go to Kentucky, but even he has to know that Kentucky's got all these freshmen. It's going to be very hard to compete with those guys for minutes, but it's going to be really interesting. Jordan Burks is a guy that Kentucky desperately needed. He was an emergency player because Calipari did not want to go into this year's season of college basketball with only 8 players. That would have been a bad look for sure because there's not going to be a lot of depth there. If guys get hurt, you're not going to have anybody to back players up. So he had to get another player or 2. So I think that just at this point, even if you do get some transfers that aren't super talented, you just need to fill up your roster, at least get to 11 or 12 players because if injuries happen, you have to have a backup option. And Kentucky right now is very thin with their roster right now. But the Wildcats, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do. They've got a fantastic recruiting class. They've got a lot of talent, but they have absolutely no experience, especially if Antonio Reeves leaves. So Kentucky fans are definitely hoping that he stays. I think he might stay, but who knows? Like I said, the rumors are all over the place. But Kentucky is definitely a team to watch for next season, and as we continue in this offseason, we'll definitely be covering to see what happens with the Wildcats. But John Calipari has work to do, and if he wants to stay off the hot seat, he needs to find a way to win this season and maybe to be able to better the roster, get a transfer portal player or 2 before the offseason is done. Or Kentucky might have too much youth, and they'll really struggle next season in college basketball. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about Jordan Burks committing to the Kentucky Wildcats and whether you think this was an emergency pick for Kentucky to be able to find a way to flesh out the rest of their roster. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I will see you next time.